The Weimar Republic, also known as interwar Germany, lasted from 1919 and 1933, and was basically a sexual free-for-all. In terms of sexual liberation and divine decadence, there was nothing more in your face than the Berlin sexplosion of the 20s. So what was really going down? Today we will talk about the crazy facts in Weimar Germany. Before we start, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos. This is the channel Learning the World. Let's go! You've probably seen it immortalized in films like Cabaret, but these real-life stories of Weimar decadence make Liza's dance moves and look downright tame. Sexual liberation in bold, progressive art movements like Expressionist cinema, Dada, and Bauhaus burgeoned in post-war Germany, though the restrictive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, imposed on Germany at the end of World War I, created numerous social and political problems. As author Mel Gordon put it, this drug and sex-fueled cultural renaissance was born of deep anxiety instilled by World War I. It wasn't just sex the way, say, the French would have enjoyed it, like a good meal or music. Rather, it was sex that was always mixed with something else, like danger, power, or death. A conservative backlash to the new artistic and sexual progressivism, which was unjustly blamed on Jews, coupled with negative inflation and social unrest, created the perfect conditions to blend the vile soup of Nazism, and so died the beautiful chaos of the Weimar Republic. But while it was good, everything was happening in the Weimar Republic, a gender-bending orgy of modern life. And sex in Weimar Germany was everywhere. Homosexuality, nudity, prostitution, and orgies were easy to come by, as were drugs and alcohol. So take a look at these real-life accounts of what was going down in the Weimar Republic. You'll never look at Germans the same way again. The cabaret was an androgynous, pansexual free-for-all that celebrated debauchery and freedom. Cabarets were the center of cultural nightlife in Weimar Berlin, a swirl of alcohol, drugs, sex, fashion, and performance art. Seminal playwright Bertolt Brecht once took to the stage of a Berlin cabaret to perform Ballad of the Dead Soldier, a pitch-black satirical ballad in which the German army dug up the corpses of soldiers and sent them back to the front. In addition to cabarets, Berlin had hundreds of bars, which were highly specialized, catering to straight men, gay men, lesbians, male crossdressers, female crossdressers, and the occasional non-binary pansexual bonanza. At one particular bar, the El Dorado, historians say it wouldn't have been uncommon to hear androgynous performers claim to be whatever sex you wish me to be if asked about their gender. In this joyous, bacchanal milieu, Berliners could also find a special show called Beauty Nights, an absurd cocktail of night at the opera and sordid jaunt to a nudie bar. As described by Tony Peritet in Drexel University publication The Smart Set, many other cabarets were simply strip clubs or erotic pageants euphemistically known as beauty nights, where seedy patrons sat with opera glasses even though only 15 feet away. Marlene Dietrich built a legendary backstage reputation. Marlene Dietrich earns 2 spots on this list, which makes sense, given how author Diana McClellan once described her as perhaps the busiest and most passionate bisexual in theatrical Berlin. Of course, many Americans know the German actress for roles in classic films like Shanghai Express, Touch of Evil, The Devil is a Woman, and Blonde Venus, but before she landed in Hollywood, Dietrich was a controversial atomic sex bomb of the German stage and screen. Dietrich's backstage dalliances in Berlin's wild Weimar theater scene are particularly fascinating. She was known for her rapacious sexual appetite, which manifested itself in all manner of wild ways. Noted German actor Klaus Kinski described one such backstage dalliance in his autobiography, writing, "Marlene tore down Edith Edwards' panties backstage in a Berlin theater and, using just her mouth, brought Edith to orgasm." Anita Berber was a priestess of depravity who ate toxic rose petals. When someone writes a book called The 7 Addictions and 5 Professions of Anita Berber, Weimar Berlini's priestess of depravity, you know the subject was as licentious as they come. A professional dancer, Anita Berber was an extravagant hedonist, engaging in drugs and alcohol with abandon. She enjoyed coke, morphine, and opium, but her favorite substance was truly dangerous. Stories say she would eat rose petals that had been soaked in a mixture of chloroform and ether. Above and beyond her propensity for ingesting lethal chemicals for the sake of partying, Berber was most known for her sexual conquests. Rumor was she dabbled in BDSM, and she was famous for breaking sexual and gender boundaries in nude and androgynous burlesque performances. As with her drug use, Berber was overt in her libidinous bisexuality, which often flaunted a complete disregard for public versus private spheres. Take, for instance, this tale. As the Ivaninja's petty flirtations turned to suggestive whispers and drunken groping, Anita stood up and enacted a passionate tango with Mia, an attractive strawberry blonde and the partner of a notorious lesbian named Ellen. While the crowd gathered around the inebriated dancers, Anita methodically palmed the girlish nipples until the giddy blonde nearly collapsed in orgasmic surrender. Ellen rushed to support her unsteady lover and commanded Anita to sit down. The air crackled with tension and sexual provocation. Perhaps Berber is most succinctly summed up by the contemporary who described her as the most remarkable spirit that I ever met in the weird underworld of human sexuality. Not even geese were safe from alleged depravities. Practically any kink or desire could be carried out in Berlin at this time, and it didn't always have to involve a human partner. In his memoir The Europeans, Italian journalist Luigi Barzini describes possibly the most unusual sex act in the Weimar Republic that involved a goose. I saw pimps offering anything to anybody: little boys, little girls, robust young men, libidinous women, animals. The story went the rounds that a male goose whose neck you cut at just the right ecstatic moment would give you the most delicious frisson of velours that allowed you to enjoy sodomy, bestiality, homosexuality, necrophilia, and sadism at one stroke. Gastronomy too, as one could eat the goose afterwards. Fashion was a tool for asserting sexuality and gender in gay communities. If you've ever seen a German expressionist film, you know Weimar fashion was quite a thing. It was gothic, showy, deco, sexual, macabre, ornate, harsh, and bold. Imagine German designers appropriating French aesthetic and you're in the ballpark. Yet fashion performed both form and function in the Weimar Republic, and in many instances, its function was making bold, aggressive statements on sexuality and gender. In the cabarets of Berlin, men and women used clothing to express non-binary attitudes toward gender, displaying a fluidity that was quite progressive for the early 20th century. The appropriation of non-gender traditional clothing was a social statement for many in the Weimar Republic. As Katie Sutton wrote in The Masculine Woman in Weimar Germany, within the emerging female homosexual subculture, masculine fashions took on meanings that resisted mainstream encodings and trends. Robert Beachy, author of Gay Berlin, spoke at length on the openness and sexually liberated gay culture of interwar Berlin during an interview with NPR. Discussing singer Claire Waldorf, Beachy said, "She was in fact a lesbian. She lived with her partner. She was extremely open. She had a gay-lesbian salon. Not all of her friends were gay or lesbian, so she socialized with lots of other entertainers, but her sexuality was also something that was never hidden. And probably most people understood that she actually loved women and was with a woman. And that was, I think, very much a part of her identity." Fashion was also used by women to make statements about economic and sexual liberation. According to Katharina von Ankem, author of Women in the Metropolis, Gender and Modernity in Weimar Culture, for many women, fashion promised sexual liberation, social mobility, and narcissistic gratification outside the confinements of traditional identified politics. And then there was Anita Berber, erstwhile eater of chloroform and ether-soaked rose petals, who pushed sexuality and fashion about as far as you could short of walking around naked on public transportation. She was known to powder herself up and went out basically naked beneath a mink coat with nothing on other than a gold chain. She was also known for having a pet chimpanzee with her as well. Gender fluidity was prevalent. Gender bending was huge during the Weimar Republic. Cross-dressing and transvestism was a popular activity both in and outside of the LGBTQIA communities, and often went hand in hand with exploring non-binary gender and sexuality in a safe environment. Austrian writer Stefan Zweig, who, bear in mind, was critical of all this sexual freedom and described debauched balls thus: Berlin transformed itself into the Babel of the world. Germans brought to perversion all their vehemence and love of system. Made-up boys with artificial waistlines promenade along the Kurfürstendamm. Even ancient Rome had not known orgies like the Berlin transvestite balls, where hundreds of men in women's clothes and women in men's clothes danced under the benevolent eyes of the police. Amid the general collapse of values, a kind of insanity took hold of precisely those middle-class circles which had hitherto been unshakable in their order. Young ladies proudly boasted that they were perverted. To be suspected of virginity at 16 would have been considered a disgrace in every school in Berlin. Marlene Dietrich had an affair with a teenaged Greta Garbo and broke her heart. Although it was once thought Swedish silver screen legend Greta Garbo and Hollywood bombshell Marlene Dietrich weren't particularly well acquainted, author Diana McClellan claimed to have unearthed proof these two stars were actually lovers early in their careers. In 1925, Garbo was 19 years old and living in Berlin when she appeared in The Joyless Street alongside Dietrich, who was 23. Dietrich consistently denied having been in the film, and since no complete prints of it survive, it was hard to prove her wrong. McClellan extensively studied the surviving footage solely to see Garbo's performance. During the process, and using several old photos as a means of verification, she's near certain Dietrich appears in several key scenes. According to McClellan's research, Garbo and Dietrich had a torrid affair on the film's set. The younger Garbo fell head over heels for Dietrich, who had no interest in a lasting relationship. The affair burned brightly but quickly, and left both actresses embittered for life. Dietrich later confided in friend and writer Sam Taylor that Garbo was an unintelligent Scandinavian child who wore dirty underwear. McClellan wrote that Garbo on the other hand felt betrayed by a monster who spoke of her secrets, mocked her roots and sneered at her sex. She was wounded, shamed and traumatized. Prostitution was deregulated, widespread, and politicized. As Laurie Marhofer of Syracuse University wrote in Degeneration, Sexual Freedom, and the Politics of the Weimar Republic, 1918–1933, there was a movement to deregulate prostitution in interwar Germany that resulted in a new law in 1927. Depending on your budget, you could get prostitutes delivered in a limo with champagne or pick a partner up from the street. Yet, as Jill Suzanne Smith of Bowdoin College explained, prostitution in the Weimar Republic wasn't simply a capitalist reinforcement of patriarchal values whereby powerful heterosexual men sought out women for purchase. The historian Julia Roos, for example, shows in her archival research that prostitutes' active participation in the public debate over prostitution reform created a counter-discourse that contradicted widespread stereotypes of the prostitute as apathetic and degenerate. Indeed, Roos argues that an analysis of prostitution is central to an investigation of the drastic changes in gender roles that took place during the Weimar Republic. Instead of reading prostitution simply as an indicator of the entrenchment of patriarchal structures, it can also be read to expose cracks in those very structures. It wasn't always empowering, though. As Stephen Lemons wrote for Salon, as inflation rendered paper money essentially worthless, women took to the streets in droves looking for clients just so they could eat and keep a roof over their heads. Some even traveled in mother-daughter teams. Sex in the Weimar Republic, German homosexual emancipation makes it clear that there were also plenty of male prostitutes in Berlin from all positions on the sexuality spectrum. That's all for today. If you liked the video, put a like and don't forget to subscribe. Bye everyone.